Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling in from. This is the beauty of technology. Thank you all for joining us for Peace Corps to Black Lives Matter, striving for allyship at home and abroad. One little issue that we are waiting for is to have the sign language interpreter to join us. So hopefully that will happen soon. My name is Brian Biery and I will be the moderator for this session. I served in the Peace Corps in Guatemala as a youth development specialist in the early 90s, and then as a Peace Corps trainer again shortly after I completed my volunteer service. This issue is extremely important not only to the Peace Corps community, but also to our entire society. So we're very excited to bring you this group of returned Peace Corps volunteers to have a discussion about the topic of today. What I would like to do is introduce Planning Committee member and returned Peace Corps volunteer Justin Fugle to describe the desired outcomes for this session. Justin?
Thanks, Brian. It was vital to have a session at this conference to consider diversity, equity, and inclusion in the Peace Corps experience. You may be shocked by the stories you're about to hear, shocked that RPCVs of color have to confront an endless series of obstacles and negative assumptions that white volunteers do not have to deal with. And we hope that this realization will help white volunteers, especially, to reflect on racism, privilege, and allyship. We feel that allyship is one of the central tenets of Peace Corps service, and as Peace Corps volunteers, we are taught to listen and learn from our counterparts and to work in support of their vision for the community. So RPCVs should have the tools to become allies around the world, here in the US and within the Peace Corps itself. In most cases, as new PCVs, our counterparts were our allies. They supported us and stood up for us, both in our presence and in our absence, vouching for us and lending us their credibility before we could speak the local languages or even find our way around. Our counterparts opened doors for us and convinced skeptics to give us a chance to succeed. That's what solidarity and allyship feels like and looks like. So there are many opportunities for allyship among PCVs, both during our service and afterwards. And there are also many important ways to be an ally in dismantling systemic racism here. We hope the session will inspire you to learn more and then to do more. So thank you all for being here. Thanks to my co-organizers, Martha, Pat, and Preston. Thanks to the panelists for sharing your stories with us to raise our awareness. And thanks to our professional DEI facilitator, Brian, for leading us through the next hour of learning and reflection. Brian, back to you.
Thanks very much, Justin, for that concise and thorough overview of the purpose and intent of this particular session. We're excited to be with you today. And what I wanted to describe as far as the session process is that in our design, we wanted it to be interactive. We want you to participate. We want you to be thinking about these issues profoundly and deeply and personally. We want this to be an experience whereby you will be able to take information with you and potentially change your life in some way. With that in mind, we have added several audience polls, a word cloud. We're going to be watching a video. And you will have the opportunity to participate in the chat box, as well as submit questions to our panelists. So one note of important note of caution is that when using all these communication tools with the diversity, equity, inclusion lens in mind, we ask you to remember the following agreements for our work today, as we want to create a safe space for everyone. First of all, respect the opinions of others, even if they differ from our own. Listen with an open heart and an open mind. Understand that all input has value. Take responsibility for your comments and assume positive intent of everyone in the room. Our desire today is to create an environment that is free of criticism or judgment and that represents the bias-free world we all envision for everyone. What we'd like to do is launch the first poll. So Carrie, if you could do that. As the poll comes up, please participate in it. The philosophy behind polling is to check the temperature in the room. So we'd love to have you start to populate the poll as soon as you can. These questions are designed, thank you for those of you who are populating it. These questions are designed to seed the concept of allyship, the concept or the issues potentially of how people were treated as Peace Corps volunteers, especially if they're coming from different backgrounds, and essentially to help us to read the room and how people are feeling in the room. What I'd like you to do is, as you see the results, and we have a terrific response so far, it's over 50%. I want you to ask yourself a couple of questions. What do the results suggest or say about our collective Peace Corps experience? How might that experience be improved? What does it say about the people who are on the call and what they have seen and what they know about allyship? So please go ahead and place your thoughts and observations in the chat when you have a chance. And we have over 75% of people have responded. And just as a quick observation, it appears as though the majority of people are familiar with allyship. So what we'd like to do today is to go into a little bit deeper, not only about allyship, but how it might be used as Peace Corps volunteers, both here and abroad. So with just another minute, we're going to close the poll. And we'll just take a second to allow everyone to see the results. Thanks to everyone for participating. This session is action-packed and full, so we need to move on to our next, the next aspect of our session. So just take a look at the results of the poll, see where everyone lands, and see how people were treated during their Peace Corps experience, and then their recognition and acknowledgement of allyship. So Carrie, let's go ahead and start the video. Actually, let me describe the video real quickly. The Many Faces of Peace Corps is a program of the Museum of the Peace Corps Experience. And let's put up the, I see a lot of people didn't, the poll results. So let's look at the poll results while I'm mentioning this. So the Many Faces of Peace Corps is a program of the Museum of the Peace Corps Experience. Its purpose is to encourage individuals in the diverse Peace Corps community, particularly those from underrepresented populations, to share objects and stories about their unique Peace Corps experiences. Stories told by volunteers who represent diversity of backgrounds in the US open doors to recognizing racial, gender, and religious discrimination, and thus help us to address disparities and injustices. Stories educate museum visitors and stimulate conversations about tolerance and respect for humans, no matter what color they are, how they live, or what they believe. So now let's watch the Many Faces of Peace Corps video. Thank you, Carrie.
I guess at the time I must have been 10 years old, when John F. Kennedy was running for president against Richard M. Nixon. I can vividly recall pretty close to Election Day in 1960. Nixon and Kennedy were neck and neck in the polls. No one was sure who was going to win. John F. Kennedy made a very stirring speech on the campus of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, in which he proposed a radical idea at the time, because it was 1960, that we create something that he was calling the Peace Corps. He was going to invite young Americans, mostly college graduates from all over the country, to enlist for 2 years and go do good work around the world, and thereby give people around the world the opportunity to know Americans firsthand. And I remember as a 10-year-old boy turning to my mother and saying, "Mom, when I grow up and graduate college, I'm going to do that." And I did.
My second situation in the Philippines, they were expecting a white volunteer. So having me come there was like, who is this? Like, is she American? My counterpart actually told me that she had to tell her coworkers not to call me the N-word because it was not acceptable. They're getting nervous about the darker skinned people, and they are thinking we're aggressive. And so I had to really say, Tarshay, just be yourself. Just do not let it get to you. Be engaging, be approachable. People want to live their life comfortable as possible. You notice a lot of Black people, a lot of people, Latinos, they stay within their own communities because they don't want to have to deal with the discrimination. It is so hard. That goes to heart with Peace Corps trying to making it opportunities for people of color to volunteer. They have to make it worth their while. In the Philippines, I didn't have any support. And I admit some of it was my fault too, because at that point, I didn't reach out to Peace Corps for help. I thought I was strong and I was going to deal with it. Like, I wouldn't know how to tell someone who wouldn't understand my situation about my situation. And I probably wouldn't talk to you about it. It comes to you and it piles up. So you need to speak on it. One of the things I got feedback from the white volunteers in Honduras was, "Oh, you're just pulling a race card. It's not that bad." And I'm like, okay, you don't understand because you don't know it. You don't see it. And I'm not saying that the white volunteers didn't get their own share of discrimination, because I'm sure they did. They might not even know they're being discriminated against because they're not used to it. I trigger it really easy because I know when to see it because I deal with it all the time. I just wish anybody who's interested in the Peace Corps to understand that it is such a great opportunity. Even for me, who just told you all the stuff that happened that was not great, and I still loved it. I don't take any of those experiences away from it. It's made me who I am today.
I was the only Asian American volunteer. They actually called me La Chinoise, which is the Chinese lady. And I had to explain, and I had this spiel, I would say, in America, you have lots of different people with different color, hair, skin, origins. We all have different backgrounds. A lot of immigrants from different continents all find America their home. I may look different, but I am still American. The village people got it. They got it because they knew I was the American lady who lives in the hut behind the church, and she does work with the community. In the city, oftentimes I would get mistaken for a massage therapist or a Chinese lady who works in a special house for ladies. So I would get propositioned a lot, including, motorcycle taxi drivers would ask me how much I charge. Are you expensive? In the village, someone would have a VCR or a TV and would offer to collect a few pennies per person to show them old Hong Kong movies. So I think when they saw those movies, the kids would come and watch on a weeknight, and they saw people like me, like, "Oh, you're La Chinoise, so you must be from China." I said, "Well, I'm not from China," so I couldn't explode their brain with so much like cross-cultural
Korean.
Yes. Korean American, but it just wouldn't fly. My sister joined me my last 2 weeks in Benin. And as we were getting on the tarmac to go up the stairs, they were checking my paper tickets and my passport, and they said, "You're not American. We don't believe you. These passports are fake." And they spent a good half hour looking at the passport under UV light to see if it was a counterfeit. It's like, "We don't believe you're American because you look Chinese to us." We were barred from entering, getting on the plane. So I finally had to pull out my Peace Corps ID and tell them I worked in your country for the Peace Corps. I'm finally leaving because I finished my duty, and you need to get me on this plane because my sister and I are American citizens. And so I had to do another spiel to educate. We look different, but it's because we had different origins, but our family is in the United States, and I volunteered as an American volunteer. So it took a long time. I thought we would not be able to board the plane, but we finally did.
Before Peace Corps, I was not out as a queer woman, and I didn't come out until I was in Peace Corps. It's funny, I actually came out to my group who I'd only known for 10 days during an activity in Jamaica before even a lot of my friends who I've known for years here in the States. They had a outside facilitator come in. He was doing an activity, a kind of cross the line activity to get to know each other. One of the questions was, cross the line if you identify and are a part of the LGBTQ community. I remember standing there and I was like, I'm not gonna tell no one. Like, people back home don't know. Like, I was thinking all this in my head. And so I crossed the line and I was the only one that did. And I started crying. And I think it was just more so like, wow, like I finally did that, but also like, I'm the only one. I had learned a little bit before about like Jamaica being very anti-LGBTQ. You know, staff talked to me and was like, you can't tell people in your community. Like, that would put you in a safety and security issue. Like, you can't do that. JFLAG is the Jamaican Lesbian and Gay Association there. They had came on TV and were talking about doing their first Pride. I remember my host father at the time saying, if anyone was to ever walk through these doors that were gay, I would kick them out and smack them. I remember that night I went in my bed and cried. I was like, oh my gosh. So while I was in Galena, I had partnered with the Police Youth Club, and I had gotten to know someone from that program, an adult who was volunteering. And I remember one day she had come over, and I guess like, to me, I was like, oh, okay, she dresses like tomboyish. And then she was like, well, how do you feel about gay people? And I remember saying like, oh no, I don't care. And she had came out to me, and I was the first person she had ever told. So then I confided in her because I wanted her to feel comfortable enough to know that like she's not alone and she needs someone to talk to. And I remember my host father then, he saw her leaving and he was talking to me while we were sitting on the porch. He was like, you know, she has a reputation in the community. He was like, yeah, people think, you know, she likes women. I was like, oh, okay. And he was like, yeah, he was like, but you know, and I said this to a couple of my friends, and they don't agree with me. He was like, but it ain't my business who she loves, so she can love who she wants. And like, it like hit me. So I think I told myself when I come back to the States, I'm not going to hide that because I have the privilege to not do that.
My ethnicity is Sri Lankan, Portuguese, and Dutch. But I was born and raised here. A lot of people think I'm from another country, but I have to tell people all the time that not everyone that looks like me is from another country. Some of us are born and raised here. So the first time I went to my village, they didn't see me as an American. They saw me as Indian. And they did not believe me at all. They laughed at me. They kept asking, when's this American showing up? And I had to keep telling them I'm the American. Every day or every other day, I had to go into a diversity session with a lot of the people there to talk about the United States and the diversity of our country, because they just would not believe. And then sometimes I'd have another volunteer come to visit me who was Caucasian, and it was like a rock star arrived. They were inviting him to weddings, and I'm like, you don't even know this person. And so that was really, really hard. I was the first American that's ever lived in that village. So for me, it was a culture shock, but for them too, they were kind of confused. When I said I was an American, I had to justify myself. So the onus was placed on us, the minority volunteers, to educate and to talk to people. And I told Peace Corps, like, we need to do a better job. We need to make it like a requirement that every volunteer talks about these issues. Everyone's service is vastly different. The service for me was extremely challenging, but it was never about me. It was about helping those children, helping the community. And that was the motivator. That was the biggest thing for me.
I was one of very few Latino males. I got a lot of attention from other volunteers because I played the guitar. I was very gregarious. I dance. I mean, I'm a hodgepodge of Texas in a sense. And so at times I felt as if I was being singled out, and I was at times. My mother wasn't very happy. She didn't necessarily understand it. My brother wasn't really for it either. He thought it was an elite organization that was not necessarily for kind of working class, working poor Mexican Americans. They had kind of a lot of misconceptions about the Peace Corps. I got a postcard that they needed a recruiter in Dallas. And I became a regional recruiter and traveled to every major university in Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and New Mexico. I was a national diversity liaison for the office. Got interested in graduate school. I was part of the Return Peace Corps Association. I was a Peace Corps recruiter on campus. I wasn't successful, but I ran for office. I did a lot of work that was connected to Peace Corps, and Peace Corps really opened up things for me in New Mexico. I have lived an extremely privileged life, a very rewarding life. And that is pretty much a lot of it because of the Peace Corps.
I was aware to me that I was kind of the only Indian person growing up. And I think as a child, I went through a period of self-loathing. Once I reached high school, I joined a club called Model United Nations. By learning about other cultures, I realized that I could be comfortable in my own culture and other people would be interested if I shared. So that just changed everything for me. And I knew that I wanted to be in DC and I wanted to spend my life working on development. One of the enduring lessons I have is my fellow Peace Corps cohort that came with me. They came from all parts of America. Sometimes we all live in silos and we forget that, America is this huge, diverse land. The biggest thing I learned was how to listen. A lot of what I had, all my preconceived notions were switched on their heads. We go in thinking we know the answers. And I realized, if anything, I needed to have done more listening. I think we all need to do more listening, especially in a corporate environment. It's so important. I think businesses and big companies are realizing this. You need people that are able to adapt and that have these soft skills. I wouldn't have gotten that if I hadn't done the Peace Corps. We have such an American-centric viewpoint. And I think you can see that in a lot of companies because a lot of the companies are based in America. The policies are American. But our products aren't just used by Americans. You find RPCVs in every walk of life. When I rang the bell to end my service was one of the proudest moments of my life. And it wasn't because it was just me. It was because of the community of people that got me to where I, was able to ring that bell. And every time I meet another RPCV, that's what I think of.
One of the things that I have drilled down on is not only to help them understand the culture of the United States, but help them understand the culture of African Americans in the United States. The 2-year volunteers were teaching in these villages. And one of the things they said on this chat was that some Rwandans didn't think they were Americans because they were Black. And that is a real hurtful situation. And what is being said to them is that we don't believe that you're a legitimate American because you're Black. And that's the lack of Peace Corps, not marketing well. One of the things that I read this week was the NPCA Connect report. And I really am hopeful that what they say with regard to diversity is implemented, because there is a connection or a feeling of being separate from the actual umbrella of Peace Corps with some volunteers. They feel that they are separate from the Peace Corps mandate. I think that they get that feeling because of the experiences that they're having from people in the country. And that's because the host country nationals haven't been educated. I think that the young people who have a real problem with the host country nationals not believing they're real Americans is that they don't know how to take it into a teaching situation. They harness the resentment instead of looking at it as an opportunity to teach. Oh, this is a teaching moment, they should say to themselves, and then act accordingly. I love the Peace Corps. I am so pleased to be of service. And so I am really proud of the Peace Corps, and I'm proud to be a member of an alumna.
We would like to thank the Museum of the Peace Corps Experience for that extraordinary video and for taking the time to be able to develop a narrative about the various experiences that Peace Corps volunteers have. What we'd like to do now is to tap into how you're feeling. Looking at the chat box, it's been amazing, some of the comments and some of the people who have shared. So what we're going to do now is a word cloud. So Carrie, if you could pull up the word cloud activity, then we can start that. So the idea here is for us to be able to thinking about what did that bring up in us. All you have to do is look at the chat. There's a huge amount of emotion, of perspectives, of feelings, of experiences. What we'd like you to do now is, after hearing from those Peace Corps volunteers, what word describes how you're feeling at this moment? And go ahead, and I see chagrin in the chat. Go ahead and place that. And essentially, I think what we're going to have to do is, oh, okay. Dive into the chat, pull out, Martha just placed the link, and go ahead and, actually, I'm going to try this simultaneously as well. Go ahead and pull out or connect to the link and start placing your words. I'm going to kind of follow along in real time, and I see some fascinating comments. So committed, engaged. It says we need a code. Is there failure, committed, pride, frustrated, grateful? Let's see if we can chagrin. Let's see if we can build. There we go. So as people are populating it, and I think what's really important is to focus on, there are positive aspects that we just heard about, of course. And Martha, thank you for dropping in the code. And there are challenging aspects as well. So even though some of the individuals in the video were very disturbed by some of the experiences that they had, they were still inspired. They were still, they still believed in the Peace Corps. They still felt as though the Peace Corps is an extraordinary experience and that they would share it with anyone. So let's see if we can build the word cloud a little bit more. We're starting to see it grow. And a wide variety of feelings and perspectives. If you could, I see some people still placing them in the chat. If you could try to contribute them to the word cloud, that would be wonderful. It's just so fascinating to see the responses in the cloud grow as we contribute to it. And maybe something that would be great for all of us to tap into right now too is how did our Peace Corps experience alter our lives? How did it change our perspective on the world? How did it change our perspective on ourselves and what role we play? So many of us are either educators, we're nonprofit workers, we're in the helping fields, and how much of that was innate that we already believed in, but then how much of that was also a part of our experience, our Peace Corps experience as well. I think the compassion that we all learned and the patience that we learned has been really extraordinary. For Maggie, please try the code again if you can, so that we can get your word as well. I'd like to leave it on just for a little while longer because what we're going to be moving into is a dialogue, a discussion with a couple of the people from the film and a couple of other RPCVs. And so we'll do that in a few minutes as soon as, I like the creative linkage of words, misappropriated propaganda, very thoughtful and unique word. So hopeful is probably still the strongest. Inspired, hopeful, grateful, maybe a little bit of regret, a little bit of sadness, a lot of empathy. This is beautiful. Thank you all for participating. I want you all to be thinking a little bit about what this reflects on your response as well. Compare and contrast with everyone else's. How does it align with how you're feeling after the film? And for those of you who missed the film, that is just fine. We will place in the link in a little while in the chat to the video on the Museum of the Peace Corps Experience website so that you can see the film a little bit later, and I would highly recommend it for everyone. So let's leave it up for just a couple more seconds. One other point as we move into the next section of our agenda is that we will be asking you for questions for our panelists. So please be thinking about what questions you would want to ask someone in the film, a little bit more about either their experience or about their perspective on allies and allyship. So go ahead and please start thinking about your questions now so we can collect them a little bit later. All right, that's beautiful. Hopeful, obviously, is a standout, inspired, grateful, empathy. But then there are some other comments that talk to us about thinking differently about the Peace Corps and how it could be improved. So disappointed, privileged, triggered, all of those, keep those in mind as well. And please continue to share your questions or your stories in the chat. They've been really they've been really beneficial for all of us. So Carrie, let's move on to the panel discussion. And so what I'd like to do now is to interview our panelists and then also to introduce them. Let's start with Elizabeth Yee from Benin in 98 and 2000. So Elizabeth, welcome to the panel. Our next panelist is Katrina Mathis from Guinea, West Africa in 94 and 96. And one thing about Katrina as well, she also served as Peace Corps staff in Atlanta. And she'll talk a little bit about that during our conversation. Our next panelist is Michael Vanigasekera, and he served in Cambodia from 2013 to 2015. And our last panelist is Arianna Richard, who served in Eswatini from 2017 to 2019. So if we could pull up all the panelists, that would be great. And then we'll start with the conversation. Just a quick note is that 2 of our panelists were in the film and 2 of them were not. For those who are not in the film, we'll ask them a little bit more information about their service. And the way this is going to work is we're going to conduct a round of questions for each panelist to respond to, and then we'll move to an open discussion of the key concerns related to the subject. And if time permits at the end, we will have 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and that'll be curated by one of the members from the planning committee. So I see Ari, Katrina, and Michael, and so we're just waiting for Elizabeth to arrive. So why don't we start the panel discussion as Elizabeth is flying through cyberspace. Michael, you were in the film.
Yes.
It was, you had some extraordinary experiences that you talked about. When reflecting on the comments that you made in the film, what could have been different about your Peace Corps experience so that you felt more included and supported? Could someone have been an ally to you? If so, in what way?
Yeah, I think that if I had maybe better counterparts, that would be more helpful. Also, if people would just believe what you had to say to begin with, if I would talk to someone in Peace Corps Cambodia, it would just be nice if people would listen and take to heart what you had to say. And then also just having resources to deal with some of these issues. When people would be prejudiced and discriminatory toward me, there's no outlet. There's no movie to see, there's no friends to talk to, there's no one to call. And you're in service, so you can't scream and yell at the people there. You have to absorb that. And that's really challenging and it's really hurtful in a lot of ways. I wasn't a volunteer. I was a volunteer that really, really worked hard during my service, building a basketball court, developing a school library, all those beautiful murals you saw, getting clean water, filter system for our school. And it was so hard when people would be prejudiced towards you. And you kind of have to absorb that. And there weren't a lot of resources for us to really deal with that.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. When you say resources, you're talking about, say, for example, from the Peace Corps office or from other Peace Corps volunteers?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been great, during our pre-service training, if we had someone from Peace Corps headquarters do an instructional video on how to do a workshop to address these issues, not just for me, but for all the volunteers. A workshop to say how to do this, how to do presentations on this issue, stuff like that. And then also places where a volunteer that does get discriminated against to have resources to get away from the village for a little bit, to decompress. That is also something that would have been really helpful for me. Just hey, come to Phnom Penh, the city, take a day, let's talk about it, let's decompress, let's go over it. And after a while, after 2 years, when you absorb all that, it's really challenging. And then you return home. And don't get me wrong, I face discrimination and prejudice here in the United States as well. But like I said, when you're over in a village in the middle of kind of nowhere, there's nowhere to go. You have to just absorb that. And that's really hard.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. And we'll we're going to circle back around to the entire panel to be thinking about more specifically what the Peace Corps could be doing today to help volunteers of color, and to think about host country nationals and how they're prepared to be hosts, to be good hosts. So let's move. Thank you, Michael. Those are great opening comments. Let's move to Elizabeth. As we observed in the film, Peace Corps volunteers of color are treated in demeaning ways, and Michael just pointed that out both in the film and then in his comments, which results in suffering from some level of trauma. And Michael actually had an interesting idea of maybe having a timeout or a day off or two in the Capitol. From your perspective, how might we be able to prevent future Peace Corps volunteers from experiencing similar psychological wounds, and then how might they be treated?
I completely agree with Michael's perspectives, and it seemed like for him it was a daily endeavor to educate and to sensibilize the people in his community. And as for me, I found it very helpful to, I think it would be a helpful proactive plan for any volunteer of, diverse backgrounds, or, physically looking different from what other host country nationals would think as a typical American volunteer, to help them be mentally prepared to, maybe learn from different volunteers who may have experienced similar experiences in the past, to be mentally prepared to have certain types of experiences and be prepared with, a small mental pocketbook of phrases or explanations or small mini pearls of education, and to share with the people that they may interact with, and come from a place of compassion, in that, we have to understand that most people in monocultural societies do not understand diversity, because everybody else around them looks just like them. So coming from that angle, you can, approach with a little more sympathy and compassion, and use that opportunity of either aggression or, confrontation to take a chance to educate, because they may just be genuinely ignorant. They just would not know, have no exposure, or whatever was that they had learned. They may have learned from parents or outside negative experiences of foreigners. So just take out the assume that they don't know about you, and they may not know everything about the world. They may not be tuned into, how diverse the rest of the world is, because they're so insular, especially in smaller villages and monocultural societies. So I think, being prepared to expect that some people might not be fully understanding of foreigners, and find gracious and diplomatic ways to explain.
Yeah, I think, Elizabeth, that's the trick, right? Is the gracious and diplomatic ways of education. Looking back at the film, one of the other individuals in the film was talking about how could Peace Corps volunteers and the Peace Corps office, of course, do a better job of educating host country nationals about the diversity in the US. So when you think about that diplomacy, have you thought about any mechanisms that might be user-friendly to accomplish that goal?
Well, as Peace Corps volunteers, we do a fair amount of education, right? Either if you're in teaching or in community development, or any kind of technical skills where you're imparting formation or training to your host country national partners or community members. So I think in the same light, it would be very beneficial to train and educate even the host country national staff that might staff the office, or be part of the community, or even village elders and leaders before the volunteer comes. Like, here's who's coming, this is what they look like, this is going to be their post, this is their background. And even if you physically look at someone, you would never know what the blend is. Like, so many Americans are from blended backgrounds and ethnicities and cultural groups, languages. So, you could never assume just by looking at someone's name or physical face that that you just know what their background is because you wouldn't know. So I think part of that would, just as we as volunteers educate and also learn from our community partners while on service, that we are also prepared to have these mini education, kind of like an elevator spiel for cultural diversity, so that we mitigate any bias or ignorance or even, altercations or confrontations that might arise, and definitely not internalize.
Absolutely not. I love your concrete suggestions, and gosh, wouldn't that be terrific to be able to let the community know who's coming and who they are and what their background is before they arrive. It's a great suggestion. Let's move. Thank you, Elizabeth. That was terrific. Let's move on to Ari. And we'll talk a little bit about the allyship and the ally question now. So in conducting a little bit of research, the University of Missouri's Office of Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives, its director, Dr. McKinney King, states, to be an ally requires that a person not simply notice an injustice, but also take action by bringing attention to the injustice and requesting that it be corrected. So Ally, when thinking about marginalized communities, how might you act as an ally in order to support those who may not be represented, may not have a voice, in order to actively make the space more equitable?
Yeah, that's such an important question, and there's a lot of nuanced pieces to it. I'll just respond by saying first, I love that quote, but I'll push back just a little bit on the request part. I think the time for requesting has long passed. We're in the demand part now. So I think it's more so a willingness to state that and be very clear with that. For folks who look like me, who are white, who are white presenting, I think the focus there is, how vulnerable are we willing to be? How open to correction are we willing to be? And how willing are we to do this thing imperfectly? So I'll share just a brief story from my service about what I mean there. I served in Eswatini, and I was on a bus with members of my cohort, and we were singing along to music that we were playing on the bus. And I sang along to a word that was not mine to say, a word that doesn't belong to me. And I share that to say I was corrected, as I should have been. And I was, pulled aside and said, hey, you said this, and this is not okay. And there's a central nervous system response to that. There's, walls that go up. There's, you get defensive, and it's really easy to get stuck there. And where I think it's important for us to push past that is, in order to do allyship well, we have to be willing to have those really honest conversations internally and with ourselves. And that's not to say that we don't also do the external actions. We do them both together. And I want to lift up something that a panelist from a past session in an event leading up to this conference stated, Deborah Pinkney, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name, but she said that there has to be an internal reflection, because what are we, when the marches are over, when the hashtags are getting less likes and clicks, who are we when the cameras are turning off? And I think that is the piece of it that we can lose, is it's got to have an authenticity. It has to have sincerity. So I think the biggest thing about implementing action steps that are going to improve things for human beings that we say we care about, right, is it has to come from having done the authentic, really hard, I have harmed people conversations with yourself. And I think that is one of the aspects that often is missed when we're talking about doing, policy change and correcting ways of doing things. So yeah, I'll yield my time there.
Well, not completely. I really love your angle on this as not being, that there's an urgency to it, that there's a need, and so a demand for action to be taken. I just, what I'd like to know a little bit more about is that internal reflection process. How do you spark or engage white people to go through that process? Because for a lot of people, it's uncomfortable. It's, you know, it's much easier just to blend into the milieu of white culture. What do you, any suggestions you have for sparking people or igniting people to take that step?
Yeah, sure. So another example of a process that helped me with it, and again, imperfect, right? Stress the word imperfect, because we're not going to do everything 100% right, ever. But I got together with a group of colleagues and we read Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy, and we were able to be in a space where we could bounce things off each other. And if we didn't understand something, we could talk about it. And if we were feeling challenged, we had created a space where we could honestly speak about that with openness and, you know, kind of under a microscope and say, these things are coming up for me that I'm learning that I have to deconstruct. What does that mean for, you know, my work? What does that mean for my social relationships? And we were really able to build a group that we didn't feel alone in that process. And we felt, you know, we weren't also working on the backs of folks who have dealt with oppression and dealt with injustice. So it was a really authentic and safe place for us to come and work together and keep each other accountable. So I would recommend, if you can find a group of people like that and just start to build that. But also, I don't want to suggest that you can't also do this on your own. Journaling has helped me to really kind of analyze how I'm feeling and how that's impacting my behaviors.
Ari, those are terrific concrete steps, and that's what I want us all to be thinking about, so that we can provide for our audience, for listeners, some ways in which maybe they could improve their lives through forming that support group that you're talking about, or the journaling. So very, very helpful. I want to move to Katrina now. Katrina, you have experience that's rather unique, coming from both a Peace Corps volunteer experience, but also a Peace Corps staff experience. So your angle or your perspective on this issue is extremely valuable. So using diversity as a starting point for how we envision our society, what did we learn as Peace Corps volunteers, or even as Peace Corps staff, that we might use to improve our attitudes and behaviors in our communities back at home?
Thanks for the question, Brian. Hello, everybody. I'm Katrina Mathis, and I served in Guinea, West Africa from 1994 to 96 as a health volunteer. And I had a great Peace Corps experience. I was in a country that was very proud to be Black, and I was very well received. I was a novelty, though. They had seen some Black Americans, not a whole lot, but they loved the notion of Black Americans. And so I had a great time. What I will say is that some of the issues that I encountered came from Peace Corps volunteers. A lot of us were straight out of college. And there were just a lot of things that are going on in society now that weren't as part of the public discourse back then. So a lot of aggressions and microaggressions and things that were said and done. And those are things that I wish that Peace Corps would have and would address now. The difference between what is real French, the French that we were speaking in Senegal when we were being taught French, as opposed to French that is spoken by someone in Paris or someone in Brussels, Belgium, or something like that. Because all of the research that I've done with white French people, they said that French is French is French. If you speak it correctly, it is French. If you speak it incorrectly, then it's bad French. And so the different things that we heard like that from Peace Corps volunteers. I would also say that when I came home, I saw a lot of issues being a staff person in the Peace Corps. I worked in the Atlanta office as a recruiter, and then I went on to be the head recruitment coordinator for the Southeast region. And when I got the recruitment coordinator position, a woman who worked at headquarters, a white woman who worked at headquarters who'd been there some 20 years, she said, I have noticed that the only time a Black person advances to that position is when a Black person is hiring. I love that she felt that she could share that with me, but that was problematic for me when I would say 75 to 80% of the people working at Peace Corps were returned volunteers. And I feel that what I took from that was that we go overseas and we have these very finite experiences. And we get to pat ourselves on the back and we say we help people and we get to be saviors. And then we come home and then we turn it off. And then we get to go back to life as normal, where I feel that Peace Corps volunteers have been given some of the best tools, the cross-cultural experiences with awareness and sensitivity, all of those different things that so many Americans don't have real access to because most of us live in silos. And so you get over here and you get the experience, you get to see what the other half feels like. In my opinion, it should be part of a continuum of service, and that you get to come home and you get to really embody these things and you get to challenge people and speak truth to power. And I understand that everybody is not going to do that. But there are some people who want to, there's some people who are willing, and there's some people who are capable. And I do think that Peace Corps should be driving that, because some of the things that I have experienced, and I did wonder about this. I was in Guinea and we would get along, Black, white, it didn't matter, because what was uniting us was our Americanism in this country. But I wondered, I said, what is this gonna look like in the workplace when we get back? And it looked exactly like I thought it would. It looked like you're over there and I'm over here. And I don't care how smart I know you are or how much access I could give you, I'm not going to do it. And I've experienced that at the hands of RPCVs. And that is more than anything that happened in my country. I had a great experience in my country. What I have experienced on the other side with RPCVs here domestically has been disturbing. Now, let me also say, some of the smartest people I've ever met and some of the best people, some of my dearest friends I met in the Peace Corps. So I don't harbor any resentment about Peace Corps. I think Peace Corps is a great organization. I do believe, though, that Peace Corps could be so much greater if it really leveraged these opportunities for DEI. And I would say made it a part of the mission.
Yeah, Katrina, you really bring up an important point about this whole notion of the third goal, and not forgetting what we learned, what we experienced for 2 years being immersed in another culture. And it's an experience that very few people in the United States have. I think that's one reason why it called to me, because I knew I wasn't just a tourist. I wasn't just going to land in another country for a few months and just do a kind of a cultural tasting or sampling. I knew I was going to be a part of the community. So I think we know the reason why a lot of Peace Corps volunteers forget. But maybe, do you have any thoughts on how we might strengthen that third goal aspect, or to be able to remind our PCVs? And again, it's not saying that all of us do this, but I think there is a certain complacency that when we come home, we kind of forget about what happened. So do you have any suggestions about how we might be able to reignite those notions of cross-cultural understanding and support?
I think it needs to be folded into the very process from womb to tomb. I think it needs to be that as part of the messaging, that this is a continuum of service that starts in the Peace Corps. And really, it doesn't even start there, because in order to get into the Peace Corps, you have had to have demonstrated that you were already service-minded, civically engaged, doing things. And this is just another part of the continuum of service. I think during the in-service trainings that we're talking about these things, reminding people about these things. And I think was something that was very important to me that I noticed on my own was that the same way that we have primary projects, secondary, and even maybe tertiary projects, we're having this immediate experience, but we're having multiple experiences as well. And I learned so much about American culture in the Peace Corps. I met my first Orthodox Jew. I met my first Vietnamese American, my first Haitian American. I got to learn about growing up in New York as a Haitian American and how difficult that was. I knew nothing about that. I am from Atlanta. I am from the South. I met the first person I ever met from Iowa. And to go to an Orthodox Jew's house on a Friday when she says, "Oh, I'm so glad you got here before this time because I wouldn't have been able to help you." She had to explain all of that to me. You know, so I learned so much, and I feel like we Peace Corps could at least make sure that people understand you're going to be having multiple experiences here. Okay, the same way that you're doing multiple projects, you're going to be having multiple experiences here. Embrace that. Listen. One of the speakers in the video talked about actively listening. Listen to what other people have experienced and gone through and who they are. A Vietnamese American volunteer came to me and she said, "I want you to hear what I hear when I walk down the street in this country." And so I walked with her down the street and she said similar things that Elizabeth said in her video. There was the karate, chop, chop, you know, hee haw, all of those different things that I never knew she was experiencing. But I was glad that she felt that she could come to me and say those things to me. My Latina friend, they didn't even know. People were just like, "We don't even know what South America is. You're just going to be Black to us." You know, so all of the different things that people, I forgot your question, Brian. I hope that I answered it. I totally forgot your question. I'm so sorry. I forgot the question.
No,
I don't know if I wrapped that up.
I think you did a good job.
But also when people talk about their experience, it's important for people to believe them too. A lot of times they won't believe what you have to say. They'll say, "Oh, you're just overreacting," or it happened.
I definitely agree with you, Michael. And you had a really, really trying time with that. I could tell. And I love the vulnerability that you've shown in sharing that. I can only imagine because people didn't question my Americanism. They didn't, but I think it was because of the country I was in. And these people would even say to me, "We know you're originally from here." What they did question was my Blackness. And that bothered me. I was told that I thought like a white person, therefore I was white. Now, to be a Black person in America and to be too Black, you don't show up right. You need to be more white. Those are the messages that you're given because you need to conform and adapt. And then to get to Africa, where I think I'm going back to the motherland and people are going to accept me. And they were like, "Well, you're technically really white." And so I was told that on a regular basis. And I think we were all getting something. And what I got was that I had to learn how to manage it because I became so militant. And I had to learn, I was always trying to prove how Black I was to the host country nationals. But I can't do that because they saw me as American, and to them, American meant white. So, okay, I got that. But back to your point, Brian, I feel that the in-service trainings, the close of service, all of the different things that we do when we're onboarding and even offboarding Peace Corps volunteers, so that it is something that's indoctrinated, it is something that is expected. And for those who are going to pick it up and run with it, they will do that. I think people also need examples of what that looks like. And I'll just close out by saying my sister does financial education for the Department of Defense, and she went to a branch of the Army, Air Force, I don't know which one, but she went there to talk about financial matters. And a white man stood up and started basically chiming in on her talk and letting people know how much he knew. Another white man in the audience stood up and said, "You know what? Since the DOD sent her here to talk, let's let her talk and you sit down." That was allyship. And the only other person he probably would have listened to was another white man that looked like him. And that's the person who stood up. And I think sometimes people need to know what this looks like. I think there are a lot of well-intentioned white people just like, I don't know what to do. But I also think that if you're going to do this work and you're going to take up this mantle, you got to know that discomfort will be a part of it. You don't get to be comfortable and do this work and move the needle at all. Even as an ally, you will have to be uncomfortable.
Yeah, the quote that I used earlier with Ari reflects on that as well, is that to be an ally, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fun at times, and you're probably going to receive some sort of criticism. And let's move kind of into our last kind of segment of our conversation to be thinking a little bit more about allyship. I think Katrina brings up some really, really key points about, you know, as a Peace Corps class or cohort, you know, when I went in, there were 40 of us, and we kept in touch for 2 years, and we met regularly every couple of months. And so for volunteers of color, or volunteers with different backgrounds, how could volunteers help one another? And I'm not even necessarily saying specifically about the white volunteers, but when you hear about issues of, say, some of the ones that both Elizabeth and Michael have talked about, what could have been of value to you during that process from other Peace Corps volunteers? And maybe you were supported in some way. So I'll kind of open it up to the entire panel. Anybody have some thoughts about allyship and how it could have benefited you as a volunteer? Don't be shy.
I think if volunteers, like other volunteers, came to visit, talk to you more, if people from the Peace Corps staff came to visit more, I think what would have helped greatly for me too is like what everyone was saying, like before I arrived in my village, if the Peace Corps staff, my village was very small, it was like 300 people. And I didn't have electricity or anything, but if they came to the village and gathered the people in the village and said like, hey, there's a volunteer coming, he's gonna look like this, please be aware of this. Because when I first arrived, they were really shocked. They were like, who is this guy? And if the Peace Corps would have been more proactive in that and engaging the community more before I arrived, that would have helped a lot.
And Elizabeth, for you, some of the comments that you received, how could have other volunteers been helpful to you? I'm sure those were frustrating. It was kind of like, you know, what we heard earlier from some of the other members of the video or individuals on the video. It just was fatiguing, right? It's, you know, it wears on you over time.
Yeah, my experience has been very fatiguing, but I used humor as a coping mechanism. So when I would get very regular marriage proposals by men, and including the motorcycle driver who would help me like distribute food rations to our baby weight monitoring program women. And so, oh, we've known each other for a while. We work monthly or weekly. So how about we just be friends, and we're more than friends? And I just have to turn it around with humor. Some of the jokes I said, well, you know, my father would like for you to give my family 100 cows. You have 100 cows? Or, you know, what's my dowry gonna look like if we were to be married? Can we negotiate that? And obviously, you know, they would just laugh at, oh, you're too expensive.
But would it have helped to have another Peace Corps volunteer as an ally or a supporter?
Yes, so in my Peace Corps experience, it was few and far between, but I would have, you know, most of my female Peace Corps volunteer colleagues were single. So just being a single woman, you know, in their 20s or 30s, that was very difficult too, because you got a lot of approaching by men. Sometimes it could be government officials that wanted to have an evening meeting with you. I would never leave the house after sundown because one, of mosquitoes, and then two, you know, just I did not want to send the wrong message to be the American volunteer being out in society with men or having beers, you know, it just was frowned upon. The other women would catch on. I just want to be to blend in the local culture. I had several volunteers visit me. Some were unannounced, some were with like letters weeks in advance that would come. I'd like to come visit your site. I think one nice program would be for volunteers who might have similar backgrounds or identity backgrounds to come and visit, and to have site visits and visit your post. And I would go to other volunteers' villages to work on global maps painting projects of their schools, and they would see, oh, this is another volunteer. She looks different, but they are colleagues. So part of that could be another way to educate the community. And I think I had one occasion where my program director visited me, but it was for an inadvertent altercation with a group of men, and I reacted. So I think maybe regular tour visits by the country staff or the leadership or management would be very helpful in providing that service. And finally, I think I feel there should be a stronger or even a more effective close of service training that would allow you to prepare yourself emotionally for the return. I know most Peace Corps volunteers, I had a breakdown in the produce aisle when I got back in the winter because there were like 25 orange varieties that winter. I just want an orange. So I think that coupled with some sort of emotional or psychological support, or even counseling for those who may have gone through maybe emotional trauma. I've had volunteer colleagues who lost members of their very close village community members. So it may not be a family member, it was their village families. A lot of people dealt with grief. We had fellow coordinators who may have passed away on or around the time we were in service. So there's a lot of trauma that happens that might not just be intercultural or ignorance or implicit bias related.
Great, thank you for all those suggestions. Again, being really concrete is helpful because we want to not only help the NPCA think about this issue, but also think for Peace Corps to be thinking deeply about our preparation and then our kind of handoff back to society. So let's focus in the last few minutes on that. What is our role? What is our responsibility as Peace Corps volunteers to stand up for each other back home? Now, especially with last year that we've had, it's been so challenging for all of us, not only because of the pandemic, but after George Floyd's murder, shall we say, the movements that were created around racial justice. What should we be doing? And some of you talked about the knowledge and wisdom that we have and the experience that we have, not only interculturally, but also diplomatically. And maybe, Ari, I don't know if you feel comfortable taking this on first, but what is our role as Peace Corps volunteers now to interrupt systemic bias?
It is absolutely our responsibility. And I think my colleagues on the panel have alluded to and spoken about this. Katrina, you said, we get out of the Peace Corps focus and it's like we forget everything that we learned while we were there. And so I think it's our job to remember as folks who are not people of color, who are not Black, that it's really easy and convenient for us to not have to care about things if it doesn't directly impact us. So it's remembering what it felt like to sit with a community that is experiencing the need or is experiencing the marginalization, and we cannot, because it's now convenient, allow ourselves to remove our urgency in fixing things. So like Katrina was saying earlier, we have all these tools and we, I think, can get stuck in this exceptionalism of, well, I did Peace Corps, so I did my due diligence and I'm a good person. I think we still have to maintain that I'm here to be of service to other people, even if I can kind of close my door and not have to deal with the consequences.
Katrina.
Hey, Brian, can I get in on that? Ari well said. Let me just say that I think the hardest part around this is going to be getting past for white RPCVs is, if who want to do this work, is that savior complex or that savior mentality can't be there because the dynamics are different. And I think that is what changes it a lot of times. When you are overseas and you are helping people in developing countries that need your help in a different way than when you come home and you're dealing with people like me. And what I would have loved, and this is not anyone's fault, but there was, I would say, a staff person in Guinea. When I came home and we all worked for the same place, he had taken an RPCV under his wing. I would have loved to have been given that same attention that young white man was given. And he wasn't not giving it to me because I was Black. We didn't have that relationship. I just simply would have loved to have had that relationship so that I could have gotten the mentoring that this young white guy was getting and the advancement in his career and et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of times it's about, it's a different type of help. My parents have master's degrees too. You're not going to be my savior. But what you do understand is that the playing field is not level. Okay, so when you have access to meetings, when you know that there are opportunities, and if we go back to use the example that I gave with the Peace Corps, while I really appreciated that woman bringing it out, pointing it out to me, Peace Corps has to challenge even as people in leadership. How you can't continue to sit here and do the same things that you've done. So what are the metrics? What type of follow-up and feedback are we giving? How are we holding people accountable for decisions that impact people's lives? You know, and I think that is what we're going to have to do, but there's no more savior, the savior complex or the God complex kind of thing. Because it's over, I think sometimes people struggle with that. And then they say, well, because we're both here in this building and both here in this meeting, you don't need any help. And that's not true. We all know that's not true.
Yeah, I think, Katrina, that's extremely important to move away from savior, but more to, and everyone has a slightly different definition of ally, but the ally who is supportive, the ally who listens, the ally who works in partnership, the ally who communicates, the ally who resonates or has empathy for the people who they're working with. And that I just want to say that this is, in some ways, it's frustrating because we need to draw this conversation to a close, but it's also emblematic of the conversation itself. It needs to continue. And while we all have more that we could say on this, each one of us, not only on the panel, but in the chat, we do need to wrap up right now. So I want to thank deeply and profoundly Katrina, Ari, Michael, and Elizabeth for your wisdom, your experience, your thoughts, your patience, your kindness, and compassion. And what we'd like to do now is to be able to share a poll, closing poll, and have people weigh in on how they're feeling right now. What is going on in you? What are you observing? How productive was this? What would you like to do from here on out as far as being an ally? How might we change the Peace Corps? How might we change affiliate groups, NPCA? How might we all improve so that we do live up to the idea of the blessed community and the community where everyone has a role? So thank you all so much for your time and energy. And what work do we still have to do at home? I just want to leave everyone with a few last questions. What work do we still have to do at home and abroad to dismantle racism? Because it's a global issue. What is your role in that process? What is your responsibility in that process? And then be thinking about what is one action that you might take in the next week to interrupt systemic bias? And for those of you who are allies, what is one action that you might take in the next month to be a better, stronger, more prepared ally? So thanks to NPCA for hosting this conversation, and thank you all for participating. We'll just looking at the end of the poll, we have a great response from our participants. So have a great day, and I look forward to continuing this conversation with everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Special thanks to the coordinating committee and Brian and all
Yes.
the folks on behind the scenes. This was an amazing experience and such an honor.
Brian,
Thank
you did a great job, and panelists, everybody, thank you all so much.
Oh yes, a quick shout out to Pat Wan, Preston
Yes.
Chile, Martha Fedorowicz, and Justin Fugle,
Yes.
the planning team for this particular session.
Yes.
Thank you all very much, and all the work you put into it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for sharing your experiences. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.